Hello and welcome to Writing America, Pages and People. If you're here to learn about an American author and some of their works, then you're in the right place. My name is Rachel Rigolino and I'm an instructor in the English department at the State University of New York at New Paltz. So come on, we'll watch this video and leave some comments below. Toni Cade Bambara was born in 1939 in Harlem. Her mother, Helen Cade, encouraged her children to explore their imaginations and introduced them to African American writers at a young age. As a child, Toni often visited the local branch of the New York Public Library, where in addition to reading the works of writers such as Gwendolyn Brooks, she met and talked to Langston Hughes, who would stop by to speak with children. If you can imagine that, it must have been wonderful. Toni enrolled at Queens College, where she studied English and theater arts, and she later earned a master's degree from City College. And in the 1960s, she pursued a variety of educational and professional pursuits. She studied theater and film in New York and then also abroad. And she taught at City College and at Rutgers University. In addition, she worked as a social worker. Bambara's message about the rich potential of Black urban life was drawn from her own personal experiences of growing up in Harlem during the 40s and the 50s. In an interview, Bambara described the Harlem of these times as, quote, a community where African genius was very much in evidence. In addition to various community meeting places such as the Apollo Theater, the Schomburg Library, and several Black bookstores, Harlem also contained the Speaker's Corner, which was an informal institution that proved to be vital to Bambara's education as an intellectual and a political activist. This famous street corner functioned as a public forum where all sorts of people, including women from churches and political clubs, as well as Muslims, Rastafarians, trade unionists, and activists from various political parties came to speak. And in this iconic photograph of Malcolm X, you can get a sense of how central this street corner was to the Harlem community that Bambara grew up in. Bambara very quickly made herself known in the publishing world as a young woman. In fact, in the early 1970s, when Toni Morrison was working as an editor at Random House and actively looking to publish Black women authors, Toni strode into her office and engaged her in witty conversation. Morrison later recalled that soon after this first encounter, Toni Bambara submitted some short stories that Morrison found, quote, beautifully political, without being pedestrian. Bambara's first book, The Black Woman, was published in 1970, and in her preface, she wrote, "We are involved in a struggle for liberation. What typifies the current spirit is an embrace of the community and a hard-headed attempt to get basic with one another." The Black Woman contains writings by Black women from diverse backgrounds on a range of issues, and it features works from across genres, including poetry, short stories, autobiographical sketches, and essays. The volume was widely acclaimed as a first of its kind in the U.S., and it helped to open the door to several other anthologies that appeared over the next decade. Contributors to the anthologies include well-known writers that you probably have heard of, such as Nikki Giovanni and Alice Walker, but there are others who had never been published before. The volume did not aim to present any one ideological position. Instead, its authors voiced diverse and often conflicting opinions. Her second anthology, Tales and Stories for Black Folks, was published the following year, and this was the first time Toni would use the name Toni Cade Bambara. In this collection, she sought to focus on younger readers and to transmit to them the eloquent powers of African American oral tradition. This collection was named the Outstanding Book of 1972 in Juvenile Literature by the New York Times Book Review. And like The Black Woman, Tales and Stories features famous authors, including Ernest Gaines, Langston Hughes, and Alice Walker, as well as works by lesser-known writers and even students from Bambara's composition courses. Bambara's first published book of fiction reaped the highest critical praise when it was published. Reviewers hailed Gorilla My Love for its realistic depiction of Black urban life from the point of view of streetwise and sensitive young girls, whose vernacular language rang true. It is in this collection that one of her most anthologized short stories, The Lesson, appears. In interviews and essays, Bambara often expressed her preference for the short story as the form best suited to her own imaginative aims and abilities. She called herself a, quote, brazenly message writer, and she found that the short story served her didactic intentions better than longer narrative forms. I mean, she wanted to not only entertain her reader, but she wants her reader to come away with a lesson or an idea or an awakening. Bambara noted, quote, "The short story makes a modest appeal for attention, allowing me to slip up alongside the reader on their blind side and to grab them." Moreover, Bambara appreciated what she called the, quote, portable nature of the short story, which could be composed in bits and snatches and therefore easily integrated with her busy personal and professional activities. In 1985, Bambara moved to Philadelphia, where she became involved with Black independent cinema. Sadly, she died fairly young from cancer at the age of 56. Her death was covered by the New York Times, attesting to the high regard she was held in by literary critics and activists. What follows is a heavily edited exchange between two college professors about Bambara and her work. The older man is Professor Eugene Redmond, a poet and retired English professor from Southern Illinois University. The second man is Dr. Thabiti Lewis, who is a Bambara scholar. And I think you will enjoy Dr. Redmond's insight into Bambara, the person, because he knew her. And I think you'll also get a lot out of Dr. Lewis's scholarly reflections. Take a look.
Today, we all came to hear Thabiti Lewis speak about his newest book, Black People Are My Business, Toni Cade Bambara's Practices of Liberation. Thabiti Lewis is a professor of English and is also the interim associate vice chancellor for academic affairs at Washington State University, Vancouver. He is the author of Ballers of the New School, Race and Sports in America, the editor of Conversations with Toni Cade Bambara, gotta show out, a collection of Bambara's important interviews, and he's also the author of the book we will discuss today, Black People Are My Business, Toni Cade Bambara's Practices of Liberation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take over
and hello, Dr. Thabiti.
How are you doing today, Professor Redmond? It's a pleasure to have you join me for this conversation about this work in Toni Cade Bambara.
Thank you. Just thinking about Toni Cade, who was known variously as Toni, and then Toni Cade. For example, her very important book from 1970, The Black Woman, had only Toni Cade. And she has a story about how she adopted, took on the name Bambara. So some of us still say Toni Cade. Most people now say Toni Cade Bambara. And there's a certain ring, ambiance, and meaning to the acronym TCB. In fact, it was Toni who introduced me to Ellis Hazlip and many of the people moving around in New York in the late 60s into the 70s. And it was Quincy Troop who introduced me to Toni. And Toni, along with a number of other very important Black women writers, including Toni Morrison, including Barbara Masekela, the sister of Hugh Masekela, a whole platoon or brigade, to use a word that a lot of people brought back from Cuba when they went there to cut cane, taught at Douglas College on the campus of Rutgers University in New Jersey. And many of those women appear in The Black Woman, which Toni edited. One of the most important books to come out of, the Black Arts Movement. One of the most important books ever to be published.
And so I think perhaps better than any of her contemporaries, I see Bambara's liberation impulse as really privileging the process and practice of the work of the people. The people educating themselves to cultivate the critical consciousness that she models in story after story, right? And her life as well, right? So everything that she did was about being holistic. It was about hearing all the voices of the people, whether it was documentary, Move, you see that, you know, it's the people tell that story of the bomb in Philadelphia. If it's the organizer's wife, one of her, short stories, it is the people speaking, the salt eaters. You're hearing from the community, and it's complex, and it's and that's what life is. Some people know, but not enough. I'll say, one of her a good friend of hers and editor, Toni Morrison, really, as you pointed out, really, loved what she did with her writing. And Toni is really unique because she, people, and I write about the fact that, she's a social worker, and she did social work, and then also, is doing this art, and as you say, just kind of putting people together. I know that she, just like her art couldn't limit itself to one thing, she doesn't limit herself to, okay, I'm just in this organization, right? Moving around, dealing with people, organizational work, and so her work in those stories, like The Apprentice or The Organizer's Wife or The Seabirds Are Still Alive, is always modeling. This is what it means. This is what the work.
You're better than that. You're bigger than that. You're fuller than that. That was the way Toni responded to humanity, to humans, to people around her. And she, I told you, she would hang around in a community after she had come to the university. We brought her to a university, and I knew about this happening on several occasions. Toni she'd take off and you'd think she was gone, but she was still in the community for several days. I witnessed this on several occasions. Most people came to the airport, you picked them up, and whatever, dropped them at the hotel, and you took them to do their spiel, to read, to do a panel, to lecture, and then they were gone. But Toni, you thought she was gone, and then you run into somebody and said, "Oh, we had a great time with Toni last night," and you'd ask, "Toni who?" And they say, "Toni Cade, or Toni Cade Bambara, or TCB." I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "Well, she's been in town for a week. You thought she had taken off." I said, and that was very common. And interestingly enough, it was very common for her to be with the common people, and the people were not intellectuals necessarily, but organizers, great organizers, literate and organizers, but hadn't read all the things, hadn't read Marx,
You know what I'm saying? And so and so that's Toni over and over, sort of using her work to teach everybody, right? Even a work like The Lesson is very much steeped in Paulo Freire's The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, because she takes those kids downtown to that FAO Schwartz, to which I'm putting a limit on what we could buy in there, and I'm using it to say, "Hey, look at how much this costs." I remember having my daughters read The Lesson. Went to New York to go cruise through FAO Schwartz. I really was doing it trying to stop them from wanting to, to badger me about something too expensive, but also, I was like, okay, let's really talk about excess. And but she uses that to show the readers, how do you come to consciousness? Because the kids are, really honest, and they're like, who this woman thinks she is, trying to tell us, is she looking down on us, but she's hanging here with us in this community, and she allows, having conscience is about a process. When there's no dogma, you're gonna get false believers, and people really be committed to making an impact as an activist. But it's about process, and you have to come into it in your own way. And so you mentioned earlier this idea of being, and so she really captured this sense of the process of becoming intellectually or a conscious person with the kid. And we're hopeful, as I write about in the book, the young protagonist is actually going to take the next step, but we see her in the process of becoming, right? And so Toni doesn't say, "Oh, it happened." We just leave thinking, well, we'll see what'll happen to little. But what we do understand is that the reader also learns, about, how do I come to this, go through this process, because you gotta be awakened to
how do I come and what do I bring?
Yeah, what do I bring, and what are the discrepancies? Like the kids are like, "Oh my God, we're really poor, and how come we're in this space, this status?" And then, okay, what am I gonna do with the extra cab fare? Do I act just like these greedy capitalists and take all the extra money for myself and go buy candy? Or do I give it back to the woman who brought us down here, right? And so that everybody gets an equal share, right? So that's the moment. And so it's for that kid, but it's also for us to think, we're gonna have a real democratic and socialist, understanding of how do we share resources, right? So so she's really just such a brilliant writer, and of course everyone knows her number one thing is the short story. That's because she even said, "I don't have a staying power, for the novel." But if you really understand literature, short stories like trying to write a poem, man. Every word must matter.
That's right.